Alright guys, the vendors have just reset, and so it's time for me to cover them, and as always I will cover every single item in every single vendor that is worthwhile. Now I will talk about everything in the base of operations first, then I will progress counterclockwise around the map. I will have the index at the bottom in every single safe house listing where I am, and then I will go to every single dark zone checkpoint, again in a counterclockwise fashion going around the dark zone, and then progress south through the dark zone to every single safe house vendor. I'm only going to cover in depth any items that I feel are actually beneficial to a lot of builds, but I will be showing every single item just in case there's a specific thing that you would want, and again there will be an index at the bottom of the screen. Starting off with, we have the base weapons vendor. Now this guy is coming equipped today with a classic RPK-74, unforgiving, capable, and accurate. Not a bad gun, but nothing recommended. And then a pro red dot sight with critical hit damage, headshot damage, and critical hit chance. This is not a bad scope at all, and it can fit onto some weapons if you don't have an existing better rolled scope. Moving on, we have the base gear vendor. Now this guy does not have anything worthwhile. We have tactical pads with accomplished. They do not have a solid roll, and you're not going to want to run these. And then we have a prototype stamina mod with critical hit chance. Again, not advised for most builds. At the base Dark Zone vendor, we have a couple of interesting pickups. First is this Police M4 with Swift, Competent, and Brutal. You can re-roll Competent, and this could fit quite well into an Alpha Bridge build if you were to get the right roll. Not something that's highly recommended, but something that could be competitive. Then we have this Spec Ops Mask with Tenacious. Since it does have damage to elites and enemy armor damage, and they already are pre-rolled, you could re-roll the main stat to something much higher or in a different category. So this is a highly recommended PvE mask that has a really great armor roll as well. This is something that I would consider to be a god roll for a PvE build and can fit into a lot of different niches. Moving on, we have a prototype stamina mod with exotic damage resilience, which is not very recommended. It's not a good roll all around. And then we have a large suppressor with critical hit damage, accuracy, stability, and reduced threat. This is not something that you're going to want to pick up. Moving on to the advanced weaponry vendor, we find the standard named weapons. The Pac-An is a very good roll. I would recommend picking one of these up as it is the premier PvE gun in the game at this time. And then nothing really interesting. All of these have, generic and badly rolled talents. The lightweight M4 unfortunately does not have good talents. I would not recommend it. Nothing else here catches your eye until you get to the Omega Rifle Suppressor with 18% headshot damage and 3% critical hit chance. This is very, very good. I just picked one of these up for myself, and this is something I would highly recommend purchasing, and I would consider to be a god rolled item. Moving on to the hub gear vendor, I'm only going to cover the things that I think are worth buying with this guy because he does have a lot of items. That being said, if you don't have any existing gear set pieces of the types that he's offering, you can pick those up to round out a set. The Liberator is well rolled. If you don't already have one, I would recommend picking one up. Then we have this LVOAC with Vicious, Deadly, and Destructive. It is well rolled, but it's not considered a god roll, so it's something you could look into. It is quite pricey on the Phoenix Credit price tag there at $12.48, but it can get the job done for a variety of builds and is an LVOAC, very strong assault rifle variant type. Then the Super 90, classic M44 carbine, military LED6, nothing interesting here. Down here in the mask section, again, there's nothing that's going to jump out at you, and nothing really is, again, until you get to the vest. The Gunslinger vest with Robust. It does have armor, damage to elites, and ammo capacity. This is a fantastically rolled PvE chess piece. You can reroll the main stat to stamina or firearms, already has armor, already has damage to elites, and ammo capacity. It's something that can work very well when completing PvE content, so I would definitely look into that. Nothing else interesting in the chest piece area. Nothing else for the backpacks. There is this Deadeye Go bag, but it doesn't have ammo capacity, so it's something you could look into. Again, if you already are building around the Deadeye set, if you're building around a gear set and don't have, the piece to round it out, this guy does have a lot of different things that he's offering for sale right now. Nothing interesting for the pads or the holster. Nothing in the glove section that is a god roll, but again, a lot of different diverse selections. Nothing in the mods, except this prototype performance mod that has first aid self-heal. This is quite good. I would recommend picking these up if you don't already have 4 or 5 of them to put in various builds. And then for the weapon mods, the large suppressor is okay. It has critical hit damage, critical hit chance, stability. It's something that can work for some builds, but not highly recommended. The vertical grip and small RDS scope are not very good as well. For the hub blueprints vendor, we have a couple interesting things. We have a classic RPK-74, which can be rolled well, and I would recommend buying these simply because they are 256 recipes or blueprints that can be repeatedly crafted, so I would recommend picking it up. A converted USC, not a very viable gun type right now, not overly strong, but we do have stamina gloves. Now the stamina gloves can be rolled many times until you have a savage talent and a god roll. This is a very valuable blueprint to pick up, and it can round out a lot of different DPS builds, so this comes highly recommended. Then we have an electronics backpack, not something that a lot of people are going to use, but if you have a support build, this could be rolled with specialized or inventive, and could be quite valuable to augment that support playstyle. And then we have an angled grip, a holographic sight, a firearms gear mod, and a performance gear mod. So all of these are highly recommended to buy as well, especially the performance gear mod, so you can get all those different skill augmentation mods to put in your gear on command, and it is quite cheap to actually make these. So again, highly recommended to buy all of the different blueprints, though the most interesting one right now to me is the stamina gloves. At the Autumn's Hope Safehouse, there is nothing very interesting, though I will show both of the items. We have this Reckless chest piece, not recommended to buy. And then outside of that, we have this Ballistic Shield Damage Resilience mod. If you don't already have 4 of these, it is quite good in a Ballistic Shield tank build, but it's not something that a lot of people are going to build specifically around. At the Wolves Den Safehouse, there's nothing that jumps off the page, but we do have this custom L86 with Brutal, Meticulous, and Talented. I really like Talented in the 3rd slot. I think it has a lot of utility, so you could reroll Meticulous, and it is an interesting item. And then we have this Small Grip with critical hit damage, stability, and reload speed. This is quite powerful for a DPS build. It is something that is rolled quite well, and I will be picking one of these up myself. At the Dante's Run Safehouse, there is nothing really recommended. What we find are these tactical pads with Accomplished. If you don't already have Accomplished knee pads, they do already have enemy armor damage, but a very bad stamina roll. So you could re-roll these into a PvE build, but it's not highly recommended. Then we have this Prototype Performance mod with Pulse Duration. Not recommended to buy this. There are much better things to run in your Performance mod slot. At the KERMAN Station Safehouse vendor, what we find is this Black Market SASG with Self-Preserved, Swift, and Adept. While not a bad weapon, it is not something you're going to be getting a lot of use out of. And then we have this Compensator with Stability, Headshot Damage, Optimal Range. Again, not horrible, but just mediocre. Moving on to the CAVERN Safehouse, what we find here is a little bit interesting. We have an Operator Pack with Specialized. It has a decent armor roll that does come pre-rolled into the Major Attribute slot. It does not have a great firearms roll, but over 1200 is fairly ideal. But for minor attributes, it does not have ammo capacity. So you could re-roll ammo capacity, and it would be a decently rolled specialized backpack for anyone struggling to get one of those. It would be a good pickup, but it's not going to get the GODRoll title. Moving on after that, we have a Prototype Performance mod with Mobile Cover Damage Resilience. I would not recommend anyone purchase this ever. For the Camp Hudson weapons vendor, we find a couple of things that are slightly interesting. We have a custom L86 with Deadly, Accurate, and Prepared. Any one of these could be re-rolled. Prepared might be nice, and this could be a long-ranged LMG that gets some use in some builds. And then we have this Osprey 45 suppressor with accuracy, headshot damage, and optimal range. I would recommend this for a D3 FNC build with a submachine gun. I would actually highly recommend that any defense builds out there pick up one of these and equip it right away, because accuracy, headshot damage, and optimal range all feed right into what that gear set is built around. At the Camp Hudson gear vendor, we find 2 uninteresting items. We have the Spec Ops gloves with Astute, not recommended. They have pistol damage and LMG damage, though they might see some use in an actual PvE dedicated build. And then we have a Prototype Performance mod with Support Station Duration, not something that's very useful. Moving on to the MEATLOCKER Safehouse, we find 2 very, very uninteresting items. Custom M44 with Dominant, Destructive, and Disciplined. Those, if someone does prefer a sniper, they might get some use out of this if they re-rolled the first talent. Not highly recommended. And then a T-Rant Suppressor with Critical Hit Chance, Stability, Optimal Range. This is not recommended for any build. Moving on to the Madison Stand Safehouse, what we find is, again, uninteresting. We have a Spec Ops Mask with Refreshed, though it does have a very good firearms roll. It has Health on Kill and Blind and Deaf Resistance, neither of which is going to be very valuable in a PvP situation. And then we move down here to this Prototype Stamina mod that does have a good stamina roll, but has a bad EDR roll. You want armor on your stamina mods, and EDR is not going to fulfill that role, so I would not recommend buying this for builds. Moving on to the Last Call Safehouse, we find an actually very interesting item here. We have an AUG, a tactical AUG with Commanding, Brutal, and Deadly. Now, previously in other patches, this would have been a perfect GODRoll and very sought after, but this has the Commanding talent, and Deadly is not as good, and it is in the 3rd slot. So I'm not tagging this with the GODRoll title. However, this is a very, very powerful SMG if you do want to pick it up, though personally I don't prefer the SMG archetype. It is something that can get a lot of use. Moving on after that, we have Pro Red Dot Sight with critical hit damage, accuracy, and optimal range. It is not recommended to buy this item. Jumping over to the Ward Safehouse, we find 2 uninteresting items. What we have are Operator knee pads. I do not recommend anyone ever run Prosperous. And then we have a Prototype Performance mod with Sticky Bomb Explosion Radius. At the Southpaw Safehouse, we find another set of Prosperous knee pads. Very disappointing. And then we have a Prototype Electronics mod with Exotic Damage Resilience. Moving on up to the Grindhouse, we find that we have this military Scar H, and it has Ferocious, Deadly, and Toxic. Not something I am personally going to use, but might be something that some people get some a little bit of utility out of. And then coming down to this large suppressor, we have critical hit damage, critical hit chance, and headshot damage. While not a perfect roll and does not have headshot damage in the primary slot, this is something I might take a stab at using in a variety of builds, and does have some utility, and I would recommend buying one if you're low on suppressors, if you want to round out the composition of a variety of weapons. Coming over to the Firewall Safehouse, we find a couple of support items that are actually quite good. First, we have this tactical vest with Rapid. It has a great electronics roll at 1265. It already has health and then protection from elites, which could be re-rolled to armor in the major attribute slot, but it does not have ammo capacity in the minor attribute slot, and that is what's holding me back from putting the GODRoll title on this item. However, it is quite strong, and I would recommend picking it up if you do want to run a healing support build. Right in line with that, we have the performance mods to boot with First Aid Ally Heal. I would recommend picking these up for any of you support players out there, and this is a fairly nice safe house. Lastly, we come to the Crypt, and neither of these items is worth buying. We have a tactical SASG with Dominant, Trained, and Fierce, not at all recommended, and a compensator with Stability, Headshot Damage, and Accuracy, not a competitive compensator. Starting off our first Dark Zone checkpoint vendor, we have West 53rd Street, and at this vendor there are a couple things to note. The pistol is not recommended, it has Expert and Ferocious, tactical holster, not very good stat points, but the performance mod has 6% First Aid Self-Heal. It is recommended if you do have Dark Zone funds to pick these up over the other existing performance mods out there that have First Aid Self-Heal, because 6% is slightly better. Highly recommended to run these in a lot of different builds. This suppressor is not recommended, critical hit chance, optimal range stability, not a competitive suppressor. Moving on to the West 46th Street checkpoint, there is nothing interesting here, so you can skip ahead, but for those who are curious, we have a military MK46 with Capable, Meticulous, and Predatory. We have operator pads with Accomplished, bad rolls here, I would not recommend them. A prototype performance mod with Pulse Duration, not recommended for increasing DPS at all. And then a suppressor with critical hit chance, stability, and critical hit damage, again, not really recommended. Moving on down to West 42nd Street, again we find not very much that is of interest. We have another MK46 with Swift, Self-Preserved, and Commanding. We have a tactical holster with Recovered and does not have very good stat points, though it does already have armor. We have a prototype performance mod with First Aid Ally Heal. Again, if you do have Dark Zone funds, this is the preferable performance mod to buy, as it does have a higher percentage than the existing ones that are available for credits. And for a compensator, we have Stability, Headshot Damage, and Critical Hit Chance. While an okay compensator, it's not something that's recommended. Jumping over to the West 39th Street checkpoint vendor, what we find is again uninteresting. We have a Police UMP 45 with Adept, Unforgiving, and Ambusher, though Adept is in the wrong slot. This is not a recommended weapon. We have Operator Gloves with Astute, not a very good talent, and they do have a low electronics roll. Prototype Stamina mod with Skill Power. This could be used in some builds, but does not come highly recommended. And a Flash Hider with Accuracy, Stability, and Critical Hit Chance, not really recommended for any build. Moving on down to West 34th Street, what we find is yet again uninteresting. Classic M60 with Talented, Self-Preserved, and Prepared. Tactical Mask with Rehabilitated, and a bad electronics roll with Health and Burn Resistance. A Firearms mod with Skill Haste, and a Laser Sight with Accuracy, Reload Speed, and Stability. None of these are recommended to purchase. Coming to the bottom at the West 31st Street checkpoint vendor, we find a couple sort of interesting items. We have a Super 90 with Destructive, Determined, and Commanding, not recommended. Operator Gloves with Savage, Help on Kill, Critical Hit Chance, and LMG damage. These might see some use in an LMG build, but with the availability of the actual Savage Gloves or Stamina Gloves blueprint in the base of operations, which could roll Savage, I would not recommend buying these. A prototype Firearms mod with Sig Ability Resource Gain. I could see that in some sort of fringe build, but not something a lot of players are going to run. And then a Small Grip with Critical Hit Damage, Stability, and Accuracy. This might be usable. It does have 19% critical hit damage, but it's not highly recommended and is not considered a GODRoll. At the 5th Avenue checkpoint vendor, what we find is another military MK46, but this one has a decent roll. We have Self-Preserved, Brutal, and Accurate. It does have very good base damage scaling and a 15% damage to target out of cover roll on that LMG base attribute. So Self-Preserved could be re-rolled, Brutal is decent, Accurate is okay. This is a gun that might see some use, but it's not highly recommended. An Operator Mask with Refreshed, not something I would recommend purchasing, as it doesn't have the right attributes in the major and minor slot, and it doesn't have a great firearms roll. A prototype performance mod with Support Station Healing Speed. I would recommend this for any of you healers out there. It does have a usable and tangible impact on PvP and the support that you can give. And a holographic sight with optimal range, accuracy, critical hit damage. Not really recommended for any build. At the East 31st Street checkpoint vendor, we find a couple more interesting items. We have a double barrel sawed-off that doesn't have good talents. This is not among them. Operator Gloves with Cunning, not recommended. Prototype Performance mod with Mobile Cover Health, not recommended. But this is interesting right here, the Hollow Sight. With critical hit chance, stability, and headshot damage, this is something that might see some use in a couple of builds. And I would recommend having one in your back pocket just in case. Moving up to the East 34th Street checkpoint vendor, we find a few items that are again uninteresting. This is a very bad vendor reset so far. We have a submachine gun, converted USC with skilled deadly ambusher, not something recommended. I don't even like the ambusher talent all that much. However, if you really want to have it, It does have deadly, and that does pair very well with the critical hit damage on the sub intrinsically. We have cunning gloves, which are not recommended at all. A prototype performance mod with first aid ally heal, which is a duplicate. Again, these were previously displayed, but you can pick these up for a lot of different builds that are in a supporting nature. And then we have a heavy magazine spring with critical hit damage, critical hit chance, and rate of fire. I would not recommend this. It's only 9.7% rate of fire, but it is something that could see a little bit of play, though it doesn't have that extended magazine main attribute that a lot of builds really need and feature prominently. Jumping up to the East 40th Street checkpoint vendor, we find, finally, a couple of interesting items. The Surplus SVD has Capable, Brutal, and Disciplined. While it does not have 3 perfect talents, it is a marksman rifle with Brutal, so that is something to keep your eye on. It could be used in a variety of builds. The Operator Pack has Relentless and a decent stamina roll, but it does not have ammo capacity or armor. Has Sig Ability Resource Gain. It could be used in a fringe build, but not something I would highly recommend. We have a Prototype Performance mod with Mobile Cover Health, so no one should ever purchase that. And then we have an extended magazine with 110 mag size, reload speed, and critical hit damage. While not considered a GODRoll, this is a great extended mag. Actually has 110 increased mag size, and I would recommend this for a lot of different builds if you don't have one that's better, and I currently actually don't have one that is better, so I will be picking one of these up. Moving over to the East 42nd Street checkpoint vendor, what we find is a little bit disappointing, but in a different way. We have a tactical SASG-12 with Dominant, Talented, and Trained. We have an Operator Mask with 1262 stamina, damage to elites, and enemy armor damage, but it has the Enduring talent. While in the last health segment, health continuously regenerates to fill up the segment. This is a really well-rolled mask with a talent that just isn't competitive in any way, shape, or form. And it just makes me remember that there's so many cool mechanics in this game that nobody uses because the balancing is off. So that's why I'm a little bit peeved off, because I think this is an awesome mask that I want to make work in a build, but will never be meta competitive until there are drastic changes made to the game. Prototype electronics mod with EDR, it's not something I would recommend buying, and a suppressor, again, with critical hit chance, optimal range, critical hit damage. It could be used in some builds. It fits on an MP7 or a Navy MP5N, but it's not going to be a widely applicable suppressor to a lot of different builds and guns. Moving up to the East 46th Street checkpoint vendor, we find a couple of very interesting items. We have a Police MK17 with Meticulous, Intense, and Harmful, not recommended at all. Spec Ops holster with bad stats, though it does have armor, not recommended. We have a Prototype Performance mod with Sticky Bomb damage, and this is one of the interesting ones. For all you Sticky Bombers out there, this will allow you to deal a lot of damage when used in tandem of 4 in a Sticky Bomb build, so highly recommend to pick that up if you are going for that kind of Demolition Expert build. And then we have a T2 Micro Red Dot Sight that is tan. Now, the important thing to note about this, and this is a little bit of a side private vendetta, this has headshot damage as the first attribute, accuracy and critical hit damage. Now, it can be, as you can see here, fit into a MP7 and a Navy MP5N. So to all you people that were telling me there is no modifier, there is no scope for an MP7 that has headshot damage, you were flat out wrong. Now, I knew you were at the time, but I didn't actually have the factual evidence on hand to prove you wrong, and this shows that you're wrong. So thanks again for being wrong. So next time, please don't comment on my video. Moving up to our last checkpoint at East 53rd Street, what we find here is a double barrel shotgun, not recommended at all due to the nature and the archetype of the gun. A tactical mask with Tenacious, though it could be used in some builds, it has a very bad roll on firearms and is not recommended. A prototype performance mod with another first aid ally heal, again, pick this up for support builds. And then an MK5 scope with headshot damage, critical hit chance, and optimal range. Not highly recommended, but it does have some headshot damage and could be used for a marksman rifle or something similar. Now to jump over to the Safehouse vendors. In the DZ6 gear Safehouse, we find a couple of GODRolled items. I am very excited about these, and I think that everyone should be as well. It does have the GODRoll tag. We have a Striker's Mask with a great armor roll, 10% damage to elites, and 8.5% enemy armor damage. You can re-roll the main stat. This is a perfectly rolled GODRolled Striker's Mask for a PvE build. I would highly recommend picking one of these up. Moving down, we have an Alpha Bridge chest piece. This is another GODRoll. A lot of people are going to want to run the Barrett's chest piece, though if you do have to run an Alpha Bridge chest piece, this has a great stamina roll already has a fantastic armor roll, a lot of armor built into the base roll as well at 3184 in the total armor roll. Protection from elites and ammo capacity. You could re-roll protection from elites. You could re-roll the stamina to some other main stat. This is another GODRolled item. This Alpha Bridge rucksack, not very well rolled at all. No ammo capacity, no armor, and bad electronics. Hunter's Faith knee pads, no enemy armor damage. Otherwise, I would classify them as a GODRoll, but it is a good pickup if you are trying to build Hunter's Faith. The Banshee Shadow holster just serves the purpose of being a Banshee Shadow holster. You could re-roll stamina as well, as it does already have armor as a major attribute, though I would not consider it a GODRoll. And then we have the Reclaimer gloves with health on kill, LMG damage, and damage to elites, not really recommended for any build. Jumping down to the DZ4 weapon mod Safehouse vendor, we find a couple of uninteresting items here. We have critical hit chance, critical hit damage, reload speed, not recommended for many builds. A compensator with stability, critical hit damage, headshot damage. It could get some use, but not highly recommended. A hand stop with reload speed, stability, and optimal range. I do prefer reload speed on my hand stops, but it's not something that a lot of players opt to run. And then a holographic sight with optimal range, accuracy, stability. Not going to be utilized on a wide variety of weapons. The Dark Zone Gear Safehouse does not have anything of note, short, sweet, and to the point. Skill power, electronics mod, not recommended unless you're going glass cannon skill power. And then we have a performance mod with ballistic shield health. There are much better alternatives to this. Moving to the DZ3 Safehouse with weapons, there is sadly nothing of note here. A tactical M1911 with expert and responsive, maybe that could be good. A converted SMG with adept, commanding, and fierce. If you activate both adept and fierce, since fierce is in the third slot, it could be okay, but the high electronics value makes it not as good. Tactical MK16, talented, swift, and meticulous, not recommended. Double barrel sawed off, very bad gun, not recommended. Police MK17 with competent, cool headed, and accurate, could be good, possibly in some fringe builds because of the fact it has cool headed, but not recommended again. Nothing super important that's jumping off the page here. Military M60 E4 with self-preserved, sustained, and deadly. Not very good talents for an LMG, and a not very good base damage to targets out of cover talent roll in the light machine gun archetype right there. At 12%, not very competitive. Base damage is good, but low RPM and bad talents. Moving on to our last safe house with gear in the Dark Zone, what we find is one interesting item. This tactical mask here, rejuvenated talent with a low electronics roll, critical hit chance, but enemy armor damage in the minor attribute slot is what I would classify as a god roll. The talent is very, very powerful in PvP, has critical hit chance and enemy armor damage already pre-rolled onto the item. You can take that electronics and turn it into a very high stamina or firearms roll. I would classify this as a god roll. I would recommend this in a lot of builds to cleanse status effects. It's very effective at dealing with Predator's Mark or dealing with Firecrest, etc. It does come with my seal of approval. The Gunslinger Vest with Robust, not very recommended. It does not have armor, has a low electronics roll. Not something that's going to be competitive. Operator Pack with Technical, not recommended again. No armor roll, no ammo capacity increase. Spec Ops Pads with Prosperous, stay away from those. Operator Holster with Recovered, bad stats in both firearms and electronics, and no armor roll. And then the Operator Gloves with Decisive, not recommended as they have marksman rifle damage instead of something like pistol damage. So that's going to wrap it up for our vendor reset guide. If you liked the video, please drop a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe for more Division content on a regular basis. Let me know how I did and what feedback and stuff you'd like to see in the next vendor reset video. I'm going to keep improving these as time goes on. Check out our links below if you want to support the channel. And as always, guys, have a nice night.